Thank you guys so much for joining. My name is Siobhan Primus. I am the Manager of Operations and Customer Success at the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning. And we are really excited to have you guys join us this afternoon for our webinar on using the science of learning to elevate how we teach and how students learn. So now I'm going to hand things over to our presenter today, our director, Glenn Whitman. Glenn, take it.
Fantastic. Thanks, edWeb, for making this possible. It's great to feel the presence of friends from around the world as well as new friends. And thanks, Siobhan, for launching us so easily into this webinar. I'm told there's over 2,000 registrants for this webinar, which is fantastic. And the reason why I'm so excited about that number is because of something I heard last spring from the CEO of the Baltimore City Public Schools, Sonia Santelices, who said, we should not surrender professional development to COVID and these times. So I know all of us teachers around the world are facing a complex school year, uncertain school year, but I love the fact that over 2,000 people, whether synchronously or asynchronously, wanted to join in this webinar this afternoon or on their time, depending where they are around the world. So it's really exciting. As Siobhan might have said, or at least I'll say, about an hour ago, I finished teaching today. So I am a history teacher. I've coached soccer for women for many, many years, and I direct the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning at St. Andrew's Episcopal School. I'm also co-author of a book called Neuroteach, as well as the co-designer of our virtual platform, Neuroteach Global. And it's great to have this chance to share a journey that I've been on as an educator for over a decade, and with a school and teachers and districts around the world. I often begin each of my classes with I can statements. So I know from research that reading from slides while you're reading from slides creates a cognitive load. So I'm going to stop for a second and hopefully you guys can look at these, pick your heads up if you can. And after this workshop, I can, and this is what I hope we will achieve together over the less than an hour we have left. Which leads me to a poll we have quickly, just so I can figure out who's in the audience. We can launch our first poll. So just quickly, where are you in the educational sector? So early childhood, elementary, primary school, middle school, high school, college, university. We seem to have a pretty good distribution. About a quarter of us are from the early childhood world, elementary, primary school, roughly about another quarter. Fewer middle school teachers than I thought. I started my career as a middle school teacher, and then high school about 30%, and college and university about 30%. You can close the poll. Thanks for sharing the poll. So what I want you to do, I want to do a little low-tech moment. If by chance you have a piece of paper, and I have to also assume you have a writing utensil, creating this little chart will be very useful as we're going to do 3 mini exit tickets during this session together. You could also take a screen picture of it and type in your responses at the particular times during this webinar that I'm going to ask you to reflect and think about how you might apply something that was delivered, whether it's research or strategies, in your school context with your students. So what are you going to keep, tweak, stop, or start? For some of my friends in the audience, we've used this before, so it should be familiar, but we'll look forward to revisiting it together. So a little embarrassing moment, what the heck? Since we're all feeling in many ways like first-year teachers, as we had to transition to distance or remote or emergency teaching, this is me actually on the left on my first day teaching at a school in Spokane, Washington. More hair, I even think my style of clothes has gotten a little better. And this is me with my first group of students. And I want to share this with you because I very much have felt like a first-year teacher over the last 6 months. Here's me more recently, supporting a student. We're doing some historical geography work, some map work in my history class. And why I'm sharing with you these two photos is I like to proudly and confidently say that I'm an exponentially better teacher today than I was in 1991 when I started my teaching career in Spokane, Washington. Now, you might say, okay, Glenn, that's a good thing. If you weren't, maybe this is not the right career choice. I get it. But I will even make the argument that I'm better today in September at the start of a new school year than I was in April or May. And you might ask why. And it's because I'm at a school that over a decade ago asked itself this question and asked its teachers this question. And now we came up with 22, 23 ideas. And you could probably imagine what was on the list. But what sort of surprised us was a real gap in our teacher preparation and ongoing professional learning. We did not know very much as a group about the learning brain. And it might be the only educational truth that we know of. Every day, every student will have his, her, or their brain, however they identify, at every school, district, or program that's represented by this awesome audience today. So what did we do? Over time, we launched the first educational neuroscience research center that's led by teachers in a pre-collegiate school in the United States that has an international public purpose. And one of our public purposes is to serve teachers who want to get on this journey of becoming more aware of the brain the students bring to their distance learning, their hybrid learning, or hopefully sooner than later, in-person learning. So what did we train our faculty in? Well, we trained them in mind, brain, and education. We were introduced to this field by Harvard professors Dr. Kurt Fisher and Dr. Christina Hinton, who were great mentors and allies, as well as Dr. Mariel Hardiman from Johns Hopkins University. And it's this transdisciplinary field that should work both ways, where researchers and university professors are doing studies that we can try out in terms of strategies in our classrooms, and we should be reporting back to them what we're finding out in our context with our students. It's a broad field, as you can see by this list that I've provided you. And I would assume there's something in here for everybody, whether you're working with your school's youngest learners or your oldest learners, whether you're working with your adult learners or your middle school learners, which is very exciting. And we're going to talk about 2 or 3 elements of this body of work over the course of our time together. But I also want to acknowledge something that I think we overlook a lot. There are 2 brains in every school that we need to think about. There's the student learning brain that we love to talk about and serve really well. But there's also the adult learning brain. And the good news, adults out there, and I'm 51 years old, there's still hope for us, right? The slope of the curve might be a little steeper as we learn new things, but because of neuroplasticity, we can learn throughout our life. So why MBE at your schools? David Steiner and his team at the Johns Hopkins University recently shared a paper about the strongest education research finding in the last 20 years is that the quality of a teacher is the single greatest in school determinant of student outcomes. I hope you're here to become a better teacher. I hope you're here to go back to your colleagues and to help them become better teachers by leveraging how much more we know about the science of learning. Now, there's a problem with this work. From research that our center does with educators around the world when we do in-person workshops or virtual programming, only 20% of teachers and school leaders have accurate foundational knowledge of the science behind how the brain learns. This might be one of the great educational ironies. And if you know my colleague, Dr. Ian Kelleher, who I co-authored Neuroteach with, you will know that this was one of his pictures that he shared with me recently. So here is the challenge. What should all teachers know about the learning brain? So in the chat, I would like you to just take a moment. And some of you who are in this audience are well on your journey in this space. And some of you are just beginning. But if I was to ask you to just quickly name 3 things that all teachers and school leaders should know about the learning brain, it should be required before we go into a classroom or be part of our professional growth. What might you say? And then maybe Siobhan, you can give me some shout outs of what you're reading as people enter things.
Sure, Glenn. We are seeing anatomy. We're seeing synapses to show learning, how the brain establishes long-lasting connections, plasticity, which is right on track, emotion and cognition being closely tied, trauma blocking learning, cognitive load, experience creating experiences that create neural pathways, diversity, effects of trauma on the development of children's brains, how the brain is malleable, stress, quite a few people noting the impact of emotion on learning.
Great. And I just imagine for a moment, and these are all great answers. So you guys have done your reading, you've done your webinars, you've made great connections. But imagine if your whole school or district had this same lens into learning. This aligns with the research around collective efficacy, and I would argue, and this was the model our school took. We trained 100% of our teachers in educational neuroscience, and still do. And we certainly, as the center, have some pathways to do that, or we can give you some suggestions of ways to do that with your communities. So we're going to look at 3 very quickly. We're going to look at 3, and just know the slides are going to be available, and we want to be allies and friends as you go forth. And there's also a lot of great people in schools on this webinar who have lived this journey, who I would encourage you to connect with. And hopefully they'll throw their information in the chat as well. So let's start with neuroplasticity. I would argue that if there's one thing from neuroscience that is critically important to how we think about teaching and learning, how we design our school experiences, I would argue it's neuroplasticity. So let's do a quick poll. This is our second poll. A little quick true false. Here's a statement. The human brain is set at an early age. If you think this is true, push true. And if you think it's false, push false. And we got the numbers coming in. About 8% say it's true. About 92% around the world say it's false. Fantastic. These come from our neuromyth cards, which certainly we can provide you if you're interested about, because it's one thing we like to break down is what are the neuromyths and truths out there. Fantastic. We have a 91% false, about 10% or 9% true. Thanks. We can close the poll. I appreciate the participation. And yes, the answer is false, and I will let you read the answer.
Hey, Glenn, while they're reading, we did have a question from a member of the audience. John asks, what do you think of learning styles? Is it overrated?
Where's John? Where's John from? Because he's a great plant. Great question.
I don't know where John is from. He didn't say.
Maybe he'll put it in the chat.
Minnesota, he says.
Oh, Minnesota. Excellent. We have good friends in Minnesota. Well, here's what we know, and I know a lot of people in the audience have been here. The learning style theory, the idea that if you design instruction and teach to how kids might define themselves as learners, and you also assess based upon that learning style, that students will do better than multiple modality or multiple sensory instruction has never been proven. So with that said, I would say we've talked about current learning preferences but with our students, but certainly multiple modality, multiple sensory instruction is good for all students. Kids are going to find success in it and challenges. And I would actually stay away. The learning style theory is currently a myth. So I hope, John, that answers your question. Because again, you might have a third grader who might be currently struggling in something, but identifies, let's say, as a visual learner. And all of a sudden, by the time they get to high school, college, or university, things might have flipped. So I hope, and that aligns nicely with neuroplasticity. Hope I answered your question well. So teachers, I'm going to give you a new title. First of all, you're heroes, right? You're frontline workers. Awesome. And I feel it every day, though we are still at distance learning. But we are also brain changers. And I really want you to think your work is impacting the wiring of the students' brains that you get to work with every day. And another way to think about it is an oversimplified picture. But look what's happening in the brains of our students from birth to teenage years. How the synaptic density lessens because of neural pruning, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. But what you use, actually, the myelination thickens around the axon. And I would argue, share this with your colleagues. Have a discussion about what are the implications for this regarding teaching and learning. I would tell you, for me, the first time I saw this was in 9th grade biology in New Jersey. I didn't see it for probably another 20 years after that. I also would ask you to think about neuroanatomy a bit. I've been transformed as an educator merely by knowing that the limbic system contains both the emotional traffic cop of your brain, the amygdala, and one of the important learning memory centers of your brain, the hippocampus. And just by knowing that has made me a little more thoughtful about emotion and cognition and memory strategies. And I would encourage you guys to, again, revisit a little neuroanatomy as part of your professional learning. I also want to think about neuroplasticity around the students that we have every day. We have students in every one of our classes, our youngest to our oldest students, who might be currently struggling, who might be currently just fine in our classes, or currently an academic star. I put the names of my students on their, let's say, fictitious t-shirt, because these are some of my current students who fall into these categories, who I'm thinking about, how do I change their brains? What strategies do they need to find success and to break through? Remember, we're doing this work for real students. Never forget that. So I'm going to pause for a second. Here's our first of 3. Based upon what I just shared about neuroplasticity, what might you keep doing? What might you tweak that you're currently doing? What might you stop doing? Or what might you start doing? And I would just ask you to pick one of the squares and drop a quick thought in there. And I'll pause for about 30 seconds. And certainly if you have questions, throw them in the chat.
We did have a resource that was recommended to us. Thank you, Gail. Gail is recommending Marion Diamond's video, My Love Affair with the Human Brain, as a resource we might want to take a look at.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a new one for me. So thanks for sharing. And the links there would be great.
And we have a question in the chat for you, Glenn. Charles is asking, how do you find a starting point for faculty? Some independent school teachers have no formal training as teachers, while others are highly qualified.
Right. I mean, it's no different than starting a new unit in a classroom, right? I'm about to put my history students back into the Renaissance. So, what's my formative assessment to gauge what prior knowledge your faculty has around the learning brain? We'll suggest a couple of things. We do have a free, what is called a neuroeducation confidence diagnostic that we created that we could share. We'll share at the end, which is a quick survey to get some early data and then to see where your faculty is. That's one way, and I'll share a couple more at the end, but great question. All right, so let's look at number 2. We talked about neuroplasticity, right? And for some people, that was some space practice with a concept they know and been familiar with. For others, it might have been new. Let's talk about emotion and cognition as the second of 3 things all teachers should know about the learning brain. When I first started teaching, I thought this: I teach, they learn. I deliver content, they absorb it, I assess it. That's education, right? As opposed to kids bring their identities and their emotions to every class period, where I used to think they left it at the door. And then I was introduced to this concept really early on in my personal journey in the MBE field by Dr. Meryl Harden from Johns Hopkins, and it's called downshifting. And I'll pause for a moment and let you read it. And this is probably a new term for many in the audience, but it certainly has significant implications for the students we have the privilege to work with, right? Kids get downshifted for all different types of reasons. Certainly in this time of COVID, right? They're bringing elevated stress and trauma from their home lives. We know toxic stress is not only has the current impacts, but could have epigenetic impacts on students' genes and their future. Peer relationships, a bad conflict with a teacher, feedback that is received poorly, good intentions by the teacher that are received in a way that are not in a negative way. I can tell you my own downshifting moments. Some of you guys have heard this before. In 5th grade, my English language arts teacher used to return our weekly grammar quizzes in grade order, A to F. And I would be at the bottom. I just was not good at the comma or the semicolon. And that really, I think, paralyzed me as a writer for a long time. And I bet you many of you have been downshifted as a student, as an athlete, in your professional work that's paralyzed you, versus the opposite of how do we upshift students. So a couple things. When I think about the work of emotion and cognition, we know we've heard a lot about growth mindset. Carol Dweck's work, I just heard her on a recent webinar, is very popular. I bet you a lot of us have read her book, Mindset. And while I think growth mindset is always worthy to consider, but it's been challenging to replicate in certain situations and has been implemented probably not along the lines of how Carol Dweck initially wrote about it, I would highly encourage you to think more about the belonging mindset. And this is research that comes from the Mindset Scholars Network, which we are big fans of. All right. If a student doesn't feel like he, she, or they belong in our schools, right, their limbic system, their amygdala is really kicking in. Right, if they're in that fight, flight, or freeze or flee mindset, as opposed to the focus and working in that higher order thinking parts of our brain. So the belonging mindset is defined as this. And my question that is challenging all of us, if you're not only if you're in the United States, but around the world, in response to the racial redress that's going on in the United States and other countries, right? Do your students and families feel this way? Do they feel like they belong? And I was reminded of the importance of this term the other day by 2 colleagues who said, we talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but inclusion is not the same as belonging. And I would actually argue, stealing from my colleagues who had this discussion with me, that we need to think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the Mindset Scholars research would be really helpful here. If a student doesn't feel like they belong in your classroom, in your school, in your program, how can they have a growth mindset? So here are some suggestions. Many of us are still in distance learning. You can take a screenshot of this, or the slides are available at the end of the webinar. But these are some suggestions of how to create and think about belonging in the virtual learning experiences or the hybrid learning experiences our students are currently having at all levels. And a simple strategy I've been using is I make sure every student hears his, her, or their name every single class period. Now, again, my classes are just short of 20. Some of you guys probably have classes of 25, 30, maybe even bigger. And I know that's challenging. But imagine if every student heard their name in every class. And that should be a low bar at our schools. And that immediately creates a sense of belonging, and that I know, or the teacher knows, that that student is here. I bet you a lot of you guys have other belonging strategies. Love for you to put them in the chat, because this is we are now friends, we're a community, so let's share. And I want to introduce you to a third mindset. So we know about growth mindset, and I've introduced belonging mindset, but really in this time of distance learning and hybrid learning, I've been thinking more about purpose and relevance mindset. What should we really teach? It is the body of content that most of us would love to teach in a school year cannot be done when we're in distance learning and hybrid. It's just impossible. So what is the most important? What is the most relevant to the students' lives? That's how I think about what I'm going to teach each week. We also know, and another one of my heroes out there, and a good friend of the CTTL, Dr. Mary Helen Imardino Yang from USC, wrote this recently and spoke to this to us last summer. Students forget the stuff that doesn't matter to them. So let's give them guided choice when we create learning opportunities. Again, youngest learners to oldest learners. And I want to just give a shout out. ASCD had a great recent issue of their magazine dedicated to learning the brain. Want to encourage you to maybe look for that resource.
Hey, Glenn, really quickly, we have a couple of good things going on in the chat as it relates to belonging.
Who needs me? Who needs me?
So some of the suggestions that we're seeing are, when you can, adding family pictures around the room to show diversity, giving students an opportunity to talk about their culture in your class, going to their events when you can, building opportunities or creating opportunities to work together to create connectivity and relationship and trust. Let's see. I think
I'll just say, if you think about belonging through neuroanatomy, through the limbic system, you'll understand. I think it creates more buy-in, I would argue, collectively for your school's teachers. So I know it was asked, how do you get all your teachers in this space? I would actually argue our faculty does belonging better, understands emotion and cognition better, because we went at it from light discussions around neuroanatomy. Sorry to cut you off, Siobhan, but I get excited about this work, actually.
You're good.
Okay. I would also, when we think about purpose and relevance, project-based learning is a critically important pedagogical strategy. There's good project-based learning, and there's not so good project-based learning. Dr. Keller and I recently wrote this piece. Maybe Siobhan can share the link for Edutopia, who produces great resources and stuff. But we keep trying to connect the science of learning to how to do good projects. Because we know that needs to be part of the student's experience. And certainly when we're at a distance or a hybrid, projects are maybe even more critically important in some ways. Finally, and this is a slide I wasn't sure if I was going to use because it's just too much. I'm creating cognitive load, but it's actually my setup for the third thing I think every teacher should know. we've been trying to find what's the sweet spot between belonging, growth mindset, and purpose and relevance mindset. Take a picture or look for it on the slides we share. But this is an evolving way we are trying to think about the mindsets collectively, as opposed to in their own independent silos. And again, I know there's a lot of people out there in this webinar who are playing with this work too, who have a lot to share from their own school's experience. So finally, we're in our second keep, tweak, stop, and start. So I've just shared with you the three mindsets that inform our work, and especially inform our work as we think about emotion and cognition. What might you keep, tweak, stop, or start based upon what I just shared? So I'll pause for a little moment and love you to fill whatever you're filling out, whether it's something on paper, whether it's a screenshot, or whether you're just going through the mental process. Anything in the chat we should pause for, Siobhan? Are we doing okay?
Great stuff. Folks are talking about infusing the three mindsets, exploring ways to incorporate virtual PBL. Very excited about research on PBL and virtual learning environments. Let's see. Encouraging creativity. I think there was meditation that was talked about in an earlier conversation.
Great. Excellent. All right. Well, let's do. We're gonna have a good Q&A period, but let me just give you let me bring up the third thing that our center would probably argue, though we move the third one around a lot. I'll just go on record. We don't budge on neuroplasticity. We don't budge on emotion and cognition. I think though we've elevated cognitive load over the last 6 months because of the personal and professional demands of the world we're living in today. So Tom Sherrington and Olive Cav have created with Dan Willingham, another one of our friends and heroes from the University of Virginia, the simple memory model, right? And I just love this graphic. And we create these learning environments for students. So it's up for that. It's online. It could be hybrid. It could be on your school campus. My question for you is, where in this process is bandwidth most limited? So I think we have a third poll. We do. So where in this process is bandwidth most limited? Environment, attention, working memory, or long-term memory?
While they're answering the poll, Glenn, could you repeat the name of number 2 for the audience? They're taking notes. So what we've covered in number 1 and number 2 so far.
Neuroplasticity was the first. Emotion and cognition was second. And we are on cognitive load is third. And I love when you ask when questions are asked. I wish my students would do that a little more. Thank you. So the answer, where in the process is bandwidth most limited? Roughly 4% are saying the environment we create or that's created. 29% say attention. Working memory it seems to be the winner, 61%, and long-term memory, 7%. We could stop the poll, but I think the poll aligns with the research, right? We know there's this bottleneck as experience and information moves from attention to working memory, right? We only can hold, depending on which paper you're reading today, maybe 4 to 6 things that are active working memory, right? So things have to be immediately forgotten. And this is where I would argue that cognitive load plays such a critical role in teaching and learning today. The work of Sweller and so many others have influenced us in this space, right? And I want you to know that there's really three ways to think about cognitive load. And I'll be honest, a decade ago, I didn't know any of this. So, and I think I love teaching even more as I keep learning and becoming better and aware of the science behind learning. I really don't want to focus on extraneous load right now. So extraneous load is all that extra noise that's going on. Navigating to the right learning management system platform. Should I have my notebook? Should I be in Google? Should I, the noise that gets in the way of us learning the stuff we want to learn and putting in the effort that's required for intrinsic and germane load to actually be doable. And we create a lot of extraneous load for our students. Not enough quiet or pauses between directions.
Hey, Glenn, we have a question in the chat. I want to ask it before we get too far down the road. Katie is asking, is there any evidence that COVID-19 will have a large adverse effect on long-term memory and our students' learning? And if so, what can we do to counteract this?
So, great question about the impact COVID might have. I think it was on memory, she said, right? Katie said?
That's correct. Yes, long-term memory.
So, not surprisingly, right? There is many research studies going on around the impact of COVID on maths and literacy, learning loss, even learning gains. I mean, when some students, when they had the space to sort of create their own instruction, might have come back to our schools having read a ton and tried new experiences that were transformative. In terms of a study yet that I've seen, and maybe others, this is where I'll defer to the large audience that's out there. There's roughly 2,000 people between the synchronous and the asynchronous experience might know of the research. I've not seen that paper or research yet. And you can see I have the words yet behind me. This is from my good friend in Frederick County Public Schools, Meg Lee, who I often tell she should sell these things. But that study I've not seen. So I also don't want to make any guesses. I think it's probably going to have an impact for some learners and not others. Because if the theory is you don't use it, you lose it. And if students haven't been using what's already embedded in their long-term memory, I would assume there's going to be some loss. So, Katie, I hope that's a sheepish answer for now, because I never want to overstate knowing something without knowing the research. So hope that was safe. That was a safe place for me in my mind.
Hey, Glenn, another great question before you move on. You might be talking about this soon because I know it's something you like to talk about, but Greg is asking if you can talk about the role of sleep in long-term memory.
Oh, first of all, teachers, we don't sleep. I'm just going to make this assumption. We don't sleep enough. We do know, though, and students, I love telling this to students, that their brain is working when they're sleeping and is consolidating their learning during sleeping in many ways. I would argue, so here's one of the great benefits of distance learning. Our school already started fairly late at 8:30. And we did that because of sleep research. And I know not every school in the world can do that. There's economics, there's buses, but I really would love those district leaders or school leaders in the audience to really think about sleep as a pedagogical strategy, right? And we know our high schoolers should be starting school later. The research is very compelling around that work. And I know there's constraints, but our school right now starts at 9 because of distance learning. And I know when we decide to come back, there's going to be a good fight and a healthy fight. And I know if students do their research, I'm going to have a tough argument to contend against. There's great resources on sleep and research. Sleep as important for not only consolidating learning and memory, but also for health and well-being. And I really hope teachers in the audience that you're sleeping enough, because that we are sometimes our own worst enemy on it. So let me just clean up cognitive load theory, and then we do have time for questions. and then we'll have a grand finale. What contributes to extraneous load in distance learning? This comes from Sweller and Pass and others that I really just wanted to share with you. We cannot do apples to apples in distance learning, as all of us have realized, what we can do in person. And I just would like us to be aware that every time we add a platform to a learning experience or a task switching moment to the learning experience, we are placing extraneous load that gets in the way of the thinking and deep thinking and effort we want our students to be doing. Less is more, right? One of our favorite friends from Belgium, Pedro de Broca, talks about reducing, reusing, and recycling, but really starts with we should reduce how we're approaching the learning experience in distance and hybrid experiences. Here's some just some tips and strategies. I'm a utilitarian as a teacher. I want things I can try to do tomorrow. Tomorrow might be sooner than later for some of you guys listening to this, depending on where in the world you are, if you're north of the equator or south of the equator. Here's how to minimize extraneous cognitive load in distance learning. Here's some suggestions and strategies we pass along to you. And the one that's near and dear to my heart is the second to last one. Let's focus on growth this school year, right? Let's be careful of when we are making something summative or going to give it points or a grade. If students are still not very familiar and comfortable with, let's say, a tool we're using as part of the learning experience, it is why I think about this one a lot this school year. So before we move on to some more Q&A, we have time, and the grand finale, let's reflect for a moment. Let's have an exit ticket to number 3 on what every teacher should know about the learning brain. What might you keep, tweak, stop, and start as you think about cognitive load that you're putting on students, your school schedule is putting on students during this complex and uncertain school year for so many of us in this audience?
Glenn, would you mind going back to the previous slide? Thank you so much. Someone needed to get a note there.
Awesome. And again, I hope on your keep, tweak, stop, and start, you now have 3 new ways you're thinking, or what might you try tomorrow in class or the next week, or even you might share with one of your colleagues. We know teaching others is a great way to embed what you're learning as a student. I would challenge everybody in this audience, find somebody after this session and teach them what you've learned to start embedding this experience in your adult memory and your long-term memory. That's my challenge for you. And email me and let me know if you did it. Take a picture or something. I don't know.
We've got some really good things in the chat, Glenn, if you want to hear.
Yeah, 1 second. Let me just say this. So
Sure.
This is cognitively overloading. This field has got a lot of stuff. So I want you to know that we want to help and think about ways to synthesize this work for you. So we've created a top 10 back to school insights from the science of learning that Siobhan will share in the chat. That is a way to help reduce your cognitive load as you think about today. And please, this is free. Share it with the world. If you have questions, call us. But let's do some Q&A. We got plenty of time, and then we'll finish up. So Siobhan, fire away.
Yes, we've got great questions. Thank you guys for putting these in chat. I'm going to start here at the top. Valerie asks if we can talk about the importance of collaboration and having students engaged in interactive activities.
So thanks, Valerie, for that question. Certainly, we know what students around the world yearned for the most over the last 6 to 7 months was social interaction. So as you think about collaborative or group work, it's also a social time. And, don't, as a teacher, I'm not getting so upset when it takes them a little longer. We're still in Zoom to get into the activity. That said, you got to be strategic when you put kids together. One is, have you established clear agreements about what it means to work together? And, for youngest learners to oldest learners. But more importantly, are kids ready to work together? Do they all have some knowledge that they can hang their conversation and creativity on? Circling back to one of our great heroes and friends, Pedro de Broca, who wrote the book Ingredients for Great Teaching, before you put them in groups, I really would encourage you to do this. A short formative assessment of 5 questions to determine whether the kids are ready to move. Maybe if students get 4 or 5 right, they're ready to go. If they only get half right, maybe there's some light reteaching or maybe some rereading they need to do. But if they don't get, any of the questions right or just one, then they're not going to be able to contribute to the group. So that would be some of my suggestions. It serves an important social purpose that's been missing from kids' lives. Make sure they're ready. And more importantly, if you're online, make sure you have figured a way to navigate the technology, whether it's through Zoom breakout rooms to visit and step into the spaces. Hopefully that helped. Others, Siobhan, I got to answer these more quickly, or else we're not going to get
Right. Greg is designing a class on instructional leadership for administrators, and he is asking what you would say are non-negotiables that should be included in this class.
Well, first of all, call me. I would love to see what you're creating because we know, and the way our center approached the work is we've trained 100% of our teachers and school leaders in educational neuroscience. And the expectation is they're going to bring the most promising research and strategies in the field to our students in very different ways. I would say for leaders, though, I would, they all have to believe in neuroplasticity, not only of their students, but of the adult learner. They also have to believe that not every adult learner learns the same way. Multiple modality, multiple sensory instruction for students is the same thing adults need. That's why, creating, for a varied professional learning experience, whether using virtual tools or books or published tools is really important. But I will add one thing about leadership. Look at John Hattie's work around collective efficacy. I believe any school, and there's some great examples in this audience, any school that's going to do this well, and then what I mean by this is bring the most promising research and strategies in educational neuroscience to their teachers, their students, their families. They go for an all-in model. Not just your English department's trained, not just your middle school or your lower school is trained. Collectively, let's lift up all professional boats, and the chief beneficiaries of this work will be then every student. But Greg, email me if you want. I have some other thoughts. Julie Wilson's work in this space is great. David Weston at the UK. I got a lot of stuff for you if you want to listen to me.
Thanks, Glenn. Our next question is from Jackie. I'm sorry, our next question actually is from Connor Cook. Connor is asking what the most compelling resources for parents would be in a community that might be new to MBE.
First of all, Connor, great to feel you, my friend. I think it's a great question. We know that learning is about collaboration between teachers, students, and parents or caregivers or guardians. While we focused initially on teachers, we're now working on bringing this work to parents as well as students. So here's a shameless plug, Connor. I don't know if you know. I just recently wrote a blog post for parents that Siobhan could put in the chat called Parents Don't Give Them the Answers, that looks at how parents should talk and engage with their students using the science of learning at home. It's very light. Hopefully that might be a good start. I know there's schools out there like the Breck School and some other schools in your part of the world that have been delivering this work to parents. We've actually also created a webinar series with our parent association on parenting the learning brain. And I could share work with that space as well. I would say this, though. I think one of the biggest mistakes parents make, and I know some of this is out of frustration during this time and them balancing their own personal and professional lives, is doing the work for the students. We know, and Rob Coe says this a lot out of the UK, learning happens when students think hard. And sometimes the snowplow parent, the helicopter parent, I think there's even a lawnmower parent I just heard. I never knew that. To speed things up, to get to bed, to get to sport, does the work for the kid. Well, if you're doing that, learning is not happening. So I'll just give you that little tidbit, Connor, and I know you're playing in this space as well. So we probably have time for one or two more, Siobhan, I think, and then we can close out.
Yeah, I think so. So I want to get to Jackie's question. Her question was next. And Jackie is asking about social emotional learning. How do you balance social emotional learning with academics?
So I would say an epiphany in some sense, and I'll just go on record, I'm Jewish, so it seems weird saying that, but an epiphany for me was emotion and cognition are inextricably linked. If the students are at the right stress level and the right emotional level, right, they're gonna learn well, right? If they're experiencing toxic stress and trauma, right, and this is where we love the work of Dr. Pamela Cantor and Turnaround for Children. Learning's not going to happen. Now, this is a hard sell for teachers. I was surprised at this. If teachers aren't taking care of the emotional climate of their classrooms and not recognizing emotional balance as a pedagogical strategy, they are missing the boat. And it's not an easy sell, right? You know the old adage: don't smile till the holidays, or don't let them into your personal space. Look, I don't think I'm friends with my teachers. Please don't Facebook me, students. I don't go to the movies with them, but I need to make an emotional connection with them if I'm going to get the best out of them for learning. They need to know I value them, their identity, and that they can trust me. So I love the thinking of the intersection of emotion and cognition.
So we have quite a few questions.
Probably one more, I think, Siobhan.
Sure, yeah. I'm going to actually group a few together just because we have quite a few folks who are asking about resources for professional development in general, and with regard to mind-brain education and how they might use it to steer their school leadership and administrators into this work.
Love it. So great setup, Siobhan, because you knew my slides. Fantastic. So we know from research that three things are needed to make impactful professional learning. It's informed by research, it's focused on helping real students, and it's sustained and iterative. The mistake all of us would make is if hopefully you had a nice webinar experience, but that's it. It's a one and done, and we know that doesn't really create change. So we have stuff for you. What's going to be your next steps in your professional learning journey in MBE? Consider us friends. I just want to be clear on that. If you please email us, follow us on Twitter, reach out. I want to be part, our center wants to be part of your journey, whether it's formally or informally, or just sharing resources. Here are things you can do tomorrow. We have a diagnostic you can deliver to your whole school, your district, and we will give you a free report. Ask us about it or look at our website about it. We have science of learning guides to ed technology. These are free, again, on our website. These are great resources to use. Certainly, this is my sheepish moment. Wrote a book about this work called Neuroteach. But really, I want to encourage you maybe to explore and reach out to Siobhan for a demo for your school of Neuroteach Global. It is a virtual micro-learning experience, and there's a lot of people in the audience who've played with it. It has novelty, choice, feedback, real classroom application that, again, is worth exploring because of its flexibility and how it disrupts sort of butts in your seat professional learning. That, for good or bad, I think we're all looking for a little novelty in that space. We have 4 tracks of Neuroteach Global, and we also have a distance learning track. But more importantly, if you look at our website, we have books and we have other people I hope are making suggestions in the chat about what they're reading. Please, friends in the audience or people who've worked in the space, share what's moved you, one, to come to this webinar. And it can't be my New Jersey accent or my good looks, though. I would like to think so. And let us be allies in this work going forward. Follow, email me. There's my email. Tweet. And let's continue to be friends in this work together. Great. Love the friend. Look, consider us friends. This is an international professional learning journey we should enjoy taking together, because students, I'll just leave it at this. Here's my final comment. Students deserve every day in every school and every classroom that they're in, teachers and school leaders who understand the science behind how the brain learns. The research is promising. The strategies are there. Let's continue this relationship and partnership. And it's 5 o'clock here or in other places in the world. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to work together.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.